Brandon Lee, and this is my final presentation for CM Course 4311 on the Bishop's Palace. It's also known as Gresham's Castle, Natural Hazard Disaster Mitigation. Bishop's Palace is listed on the National Register of Historic Homes, and it's also noted as one of the key Victorian style homes from the past. Uh, this structure is going to be 3 stories with an approximately floor area of 19,082 square foot. Currently, the structure is not lived in. It's actually a museum. You can go and get tours of the house and see all of the murals that were painted by Mr. Gresham's wife and all of the exotic woodwork that was done in the house. The house has been renovated to include the HVAC, base flood elevations at 14 foot. The building value today is estimated at 5.5 million. Although when Mr. Gresham built the palace, he constructed it for approximately 250,000, which over time, obviously, inflation and everything plays a role in the increased value there. But the building materials for the structure include granite, red sandstone, limestone, and wood. This is going to be situated right along the Gulf Coast in Texas, in Galveston, Texas. Because of this, the palace is going to be subjected to all the Gulf storms that are going to blow in. This can lead to flooding and obviously hurricanes. In the past, there's been massive fires that have spread through the town, but we'll discuss that in the following slide. Galveston Island in 1885 was subject to the Great Fire. This fire included approximately 100 acres of the island being burned. This was due to, at the time, the fire department was newly formed. It was approximately a month old. They didn't have the proper equipment or the proper training to fight these fires. So when the fire came in, they just basically got obliterated by it. But today, luckily, Galveston's considered almost non-burnable. It has a very low wildfire potential rating. Bishop's Palace was constructed from 1887 to 1893. Uh, Basically, 7 years after the completion of the home, it was subject to the Great Storm of the 1900, or otherwise known as the Great Galveston Hurricane. The storm is considered one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history, and it holds that record to today. Destroyed approximately 7,000 buildings in Galveston. Bishop's Palace actually sustained minimum damage because of it being a stone structure. The really only threat to the structure was that the flooding waters entered the lowest level of the building and flooded it. During the storm, the Gresham family allowed the homeless people that had their homes destroyed in the storm to stay at their house uh, for the time being. Discussing the hurricane slide, flooding was really the major threat to the Bishop's Palace. The management team recently had stated after Ike that it seemed that the building had minimal damage as it did during the Great Storm of the 1900s. The lowest level of the structure flooded 3 feet approximately. This lowest level is going to include offices, a ticket center, and a visitor center, which can all easily be made to move to a higher elevation in the event of a flood for wet flood proofing. Features of the project are going to include the wet flood proofing. As discussed in the previous slides, flooding was the real threat to the Bishop's Palace. Uh, to incorporate this wet flood proofing, all of the objects in the offices, the ticket booth, all this will have to be made that it can be easily moved to a higher elevation where it will not get wet in the event of a flood. All equipment and facilities will have to be relocated to a higher elevation to prevent them from being damaged during the flood. Water resistant materials such as concrete, stone, tile will have to be used to prevent the water from damaging the lower level of the structure. Much of the wood in the house had actually already been destroyed, so there won't be much renovation of the wood, ripping off the walls and incorporating impermeable surfaces that won't be damaged during the flooding. Uh, we'll have to design the structure for hydrostatic pressure, which, considering it has been flooded before, the house hasn't really shown any damage on the interior other than all of the stuff that couldn't be moved. In this image, you can see that the hydrostatic pressure builds up in the subgrade of the basement. This is similar to the lowest level in Gresham's Castle. Uh, as you can see, all furnaces and utilities had to be relocated to a higher elevation in the home to prevent them from being damaged. Openings have to be there to allow water to flow and exit freely. And at the end of the flood, once waters begin to recede, a pump will be required to empty all the water out of the lowest level of the palace. Key takeaways for my presentation are going to include that wet flood proofing was the proper mitigation plan to be implemented into the palace to prevent water flooding to the lowest level and damaging the structure. In this case, dry flood proofing is not going to be applicable due to it being a residential historic structure. By installing the impermeable surfaces that will prevent water from entering the structure. It would disturb the curb appeal. It would also disturb the original historic structure, which is not going to be allowed under the National Historic Register. Protective measures were implemented to prevent water from damaging the lowest level of the structure. Bibliography, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.